Welcome to the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie, and the Nobel Prize was announced today for economics, actually for economic sciences, because yes, economics is a science apparently. We know who the winners are, so are they a good choice? And next year, a new prize, the Nobble Prize for economics. Yes, you heard it here first. And we're going to talk about that today on the Debunking Economics podcast. So the Nobel Prize for economics, were the choices this year? Well, you'd expect Steve Keen to be a little bit dubious, which is why he wants to start this new prize. But I wonder if the prize winners for the Nobel Prize so recently haven't been that bad, really. I mean, last year it went to Robert Thaler, whose speciality is behavioral finance. He's a critic of the Chicago School of Economics, so surely that would be a win for those opposed to neoclassic economics, like Steve. And this year, the two men walking away with walking away with the $1 million prize money is William D. Nordhaus from Yale and Paul Romer from the Stern School of Business, who used to be, I think, was he the director of the World Bank at one stage? William D. Nordhaus has worked on economic modeling and climate change. He's written about limits to growth, basically, being driven by resource constraints. He didn't write the original limits to growth, but he's very much continued that work. And Paul Romer has examined how economists can achieve a healthy rate of economic growth, which is, obviously what everyone would like to do. So these two won the Nobel Prize. Would they qualify for your Nobel Prize, Steve?
No. Neither of them would win the Nobel Prize in economics. No, they wouldn't win the Nobel Prize, and that's actually a good thing.
So you're happy? So you think it's a good choice? Before we get on, so you think they're a good choice this year?
Yeah, relatively good choices. I mean, William Nordhaus, okay, he did work on what he's done is take conventional economic growth theory and use that as a basis for saying what's the impact of increasing pollution on the economy. Yeah. And if you actually see the graphs that were shown, they're fairly standard convergence to equilibrium type graphs over time, which is pushed upon the neoclassical growth model. And in fact, the model is unstable mathematically. If you look at the work done by the person who first built the model, which is Ramsey back in the 1920s, the future equilibrium is unstable. But they rule out the unstable paths because, hey, if it was unstable, we wouldn't be here. So the world can't be unstable. Nice logic that I'm sure dinosaurs would agree with. But nonetheless, that's what they do. So he imposed ecological constraints on that model, and that in itself, at least attempting to bring the economics into contact with the real world and the ecology within which it lives, that's a positive. Though if I was going to give a prize for anybody for an ecological contribution to economics, I would give it to Donna Meadows. The Meadows and Randers, I'm not sure who's still alive out of this. I think Donna Meadows is actually, I'm not sure whether Donna's still alive or I'll just actually check and see. But the Meadows family, Donna and her husband, were the authors of the Limits to Growth. And that was definitely a dramatic
way back in the 70s. Yeah.
Way back in the 70s. Let's see. Donna Meadows, she died in 2001, but her husband, I think, is still alive. So I would have given it to him. Dennis Meadows, let's see. And Jorgen Randers is still alive as well.
I think I've still got a very well-thumbed paperback version of it.
When did you read your copy?
Well, university days. So in the 80s, I would have...
maybe you and I have a similar use. Mine was, I bought the very first year. I think it was 72 or 73. It was available. And that is a far more sophisticated piece of work than what... has been done by Nordhaus. The economists have attacked it, and that shows you how good it is.
So Nordhaus has done a lot of sort of like very localized modeling, though, hasn't he? I mean, I would have thought you'd like this as well. So he's got this this sort of global scale project where he's trying to map GDP wealth and relate it to the geography of the planet. So in cells, 1 degree latitude and 1 degree longitude cells. The G-Econ project, he's called it. So he's tried to sort of like do some mathematical modeling to try and show that, GDP is related to climate and resources, which is a geographical question. So geography and economics are intertwined.
Yeah, he's a good choice. I'm not criticizing him as a choice. I mean, I think the people I'm focusing on the criticism, people like Milton Friedman, William Sharp, Paul Samuelson, and so on, who I would make winners of what I call the Nobel Prize, which we can discuss in a while. But certainly Nordhaus has done some positive stuff and generalized. He's still building on the conventional neoclassical framework, as is Paul Romer, which is using, and Paul Romer is using growth, again, standard neoclassical growth theory to try to talk about growth being an endogenous process rather than something assumed that comes in from outside the economy, which is the way economists have normally handled economic growth, which is totally useless. And Romer, of course, came out with a brilliant paper in 2016 called The Trouble with Macroeconomics, where he had castigated the current state of neoclassical modelling. And that was, in fact, the first question he was asked by a Swedish journalist about that particular question. He gave a fairly soft answer to it. He said, well, criticism is part of the development of science. What he didn't say, which is what he said in that paper, is that it's laughable. What's called neoclassical economics. You might as well have a gremlin setting the interest rate, a troll changing the labour market, and ether existing. He was incredibly castigating in that paper. And I now hope the paper gets more currency because that's a superb criticism of the state of neoclassical economics. And for that reason, he could not possibly be a winner of the Nobel Prize in economics.
So these are your people, Steve Keen, who are getting some credence and some recognition in the economics profession.
Yeah, well, just to
an extent. What's the downside?
The downside? Well, the downside of the Nobel Prize in general, first of all, I mean, most people these days seem to know there is no Nobel Prize in economics. The actual title of the prize.
Yeah, economic sciences. Yeah, that's a bit of a grand title, isn't it? That makes it, because economics, obviously we know it's all about predicting outcomes. It's as reliable as gravity, isn't it? Never lets us down. It's as scientific as that.
Yeah, the scientific is dropping a weight on your feet at the gym. The actual title is if I can pronounce this, speaking Swedish is not easy. I love the fact that Janis Varoufakis said that when he spoke at the meetings of finance ministers in the European Union, he might as well be, we're talking economics, he might as well be singing the Swedish national anthem. And I think the Swedish national anthem was extremely hard to sing. So the actual title of the prize is the Sveriges Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel, which of course, Swedish Nobel, that's the central bank of Sweden. And it instituted the prize in the first instance in 1969. There was no Nobel Prize for economics in Alfred Nobel's bequest. There was, I think, it was chemistry, physics, literature, and the arts, and those are the genuine Nobel Prizes. This is a slap-up job, actually paid for by the Swedish central bank and the funds they've organised, not paid by Nobel's bequest, to make economics appear scientific when it's nothing of the sort. And I've seen quite a few people arguing over time, and I think I've come down to agreeing with them. It gives a legitimacy to economics it doesn't deserve. Because most of what happens in genuine sciences is well paraphrased by, I've forgotten the originator of the saying, but saying the great tragedy of science is a beautiful hypothesis killed by an ugly fact. Well, the economists never let ugly fact get in the way of beautiful hypotheses. They've come out with this absolute garbage assumptions, and they talk about them in simplifying assumptions. I call them bonking mad assumptions, barking mad assumptions. I've got to work out which I prefer, bonking or barking. Absolutely insane, stupid ideas, nonsense of the first order that was then taken seriously by the profession.
So would you include last year's winner in that? So yep. Robert Thaler, who did the man behind nudge theory. Now I've been trying to read up on this, and all I can see on nudge theory is it's a statement of the bleeding obvious. And the example I found was that, for example, it's all to do with human behavior. And I, for example, might put off making a decision about choosing a pension scheme for my retirement. So the government mandates sort of an automatic enrollment into a scheme, and that forces me to act to do something. And therefore everyone gets enrolled into a pension scheme. That's nudge theory. We get nudged into doing something. Is that a theory, or is that just a statement of the bleeding obvious?
Oh, that's often what happens. You often get these ponderous mathematical expressions that actually state either the bloody obvious or the bloody absurd. And you got your choice. Which do you want? You want something obvious made complicated, or something absurd made? So
you come across nudge theory? Is that just about it? Have I explained it?
Yeah, pretty much. You pretty much got it.
30 seconds to describe the man's work.
Yeah, Nobel Prize for the bleeding obvious. But the ones I'm actually worried about are the Nobel Prizes for total absolute nonsense. Then become part of how economics develops.
So who have been the biggest culprits for that then?
Without a doubt, the absolute global winner of the Nobel Prize. We better explain the word Nobel first of all.
Yeah.
Nobble, because
it's nothing to do with your knees.
Huh?
Nothing to do with your knees.
No, not there being knobbly knees. If you get the Nobble is it's an informal British slang, and the definition, if you look at the dictionary coming up, if you search on Google, try to influence or thwart by underhand or unfair methods.
Right.
Synonyms: bribe, corrupt, buy off, pay off, induce, lure, entice, grease someone's palm. Or the second is obtain dishonestly or steal.
Right, so you're not saying, so the Nobel Prize, you're not giving the Nobel Prize to someone who's just very bad. You're giving the Nobel Prize to somebody who is trying to subvert or use dishonest means to claim this prize.
Exactly. And that's what the Nobel Prize in economics is all about.
That's worse than just being bad at your job. Right.
You've been a successful bad asshole.
Right. Okay.
The French there. So like my favorite, so what the idea occurred to me because you hear so much about the Nobel Prize, and I know that first of all, it's not a Nobel Prize. And secondly, most of the people who've won the Nobel Prize have come up with absolutely crazy ideas that the profession then takes seriously, and then it ends up causing misery for humanity when these ideas ever turn up in economic policy. So
is that because their ideas are not tested? They're not peer reviewed? Is that?
Oh no, they're peer reviewed, but their peers are equally mad. I mean, their peers let this crap through. I mean, economics. People take economics as a science. And in maybe 1 or 2 centuries, it might become one, but it has been going backwards for not just for 30 years, as Paul Romer said in his paper, The Trouble with Macroeconomics. It's been going backwards for about 250 years. I actually date the beginning of the economics going off the rails to Adam Smith, which I'll be explaining when I finally write my own magnum opus on economics. But I see him as leading us astray. We actually started well with the work of the physiocrats, saying that all wealth comes from the land, which fundamentally is saying that all wealth comes from the energy we find for free in the universe. Yeah. And that's true. And Smith then took us sideways. But the neoclassicals have taken this to an art form level in terms of distracting you from the important stuff and coming up with nonsense whenever their theories fail to work. So it just occurred to me that my poor girlfriend got the fright of her life here because I was thinking of the Nobel Prize and I'm thinking Nobble. Because how can I send this up? And I thought Nobble, and I hadn't used the word for a long time, and I looked it up in the dictionary because it had perfect meaning. So I just exclaimed, "Yes!" She jumped out of her skin. I was so loud with the exclamation.
So it's your eureka moment.
It's my eureka, one of my eureka moments. So this isn't sending up professions. So we need to have a Nobel Prize in economics.
Before we get on to, let's go back to that in a second. But just, you talked about, before Adam Smith, economics was really related to the land and energy. I mean, Nordhaus is, with that model, that G-Con project, I mean, he's almost going back to that then, isn't he? Because he's saying, well, okay, yeah, wealth is related to the land, which is to do with geography. That's got to be energy related.
It's an improvement, but what he's trying to do is to reach that position by extending the existing theory, where the existing theory assumes the ecology is a subset of the economy. Now, that's really good. You can lose the ecology and still have a functioning economy.
Okay, so he's trying to...
I'm sorry, the other way works.
He's trying to retrofit the theory rather than working for the ground up.
Look, the ecology overall, it rules everything. You start from the ecology because you wouldn't have an economy without free energy, and that's what economists don't understand still. I have done the very first work that actually brings that together properly, which still surprises the hell out of me that I did, because some very bright people have been trying to do the same thing, and they didn't see an obvious element that I saw, which is you have to regard labour and capital and energy not as separate means of production, but labour and capital as ways of harnessing energy to do useful work. And that just changes the whole mathematical structure of how you think about production. And it gives you a direct link between the economy and the ecology as well, because...
Well, labour is driven by energy, of course.
Labour. The little insight was labour without energy is a corpse, and capital without energy is a sculpture. And so they both need energy to be activated, and what they do is they channel energy, which would otherwise be destructive if you added it independently. If you imagine adding a burst of energy, let's say 10 megatons of energy, independently of the machinery and the workers inside a factory. You have Hiroshima. You don't have a Toyota. You have Hiroshima.
Oh, I could take it. I'd be working so much if you gave that to me. I could take it. I would work so much more efficiently. I sense we're going a bit all over the place here. So let's get back. That's all right. We do, as we often do. Let's get back to Nobble then, because the word Nobble, as you're saying, Nobble means that you are, you're actually trying to cheat, almost like cheat the system.
You have, and economics has cheated science for the last, I could take it back to Smith, but I'd say that the conscious cheating of economics began with Milton Friedman, in particular, in 1966 in a paper called The Methodology of Positive Economics. And this has to be the winner of the Nobel Prize for Economics, for the history of humanity. But it will also be when I want to start announcing the Nobel Prize in Economics on the same day, and possibly in the same town as the Nobel Prize, starting from next year, which will be the 50th anniversary of the Nobel Prize in Economics, the first awarded in 1969.
You are such a shit stirrer.
Thank you, mate. Oh, coming from you, that's high praise. But yes, we're going to have the Nobel Prize in Economics,
right? And
it'll start in 2019.
Right. Who would you have given it to this year? By the way, I do fear some sort of legal action going on, because you're not actually just saying that they're incompetent. The word Nobble is saying that somebody is trying to cheat the system, isn't it?
Well, you wait till I read out to you some of the texts that I think gives people the deserves to get this reward. Okay. So I'll choose, I have on my screen at the moment, I have my four of my favorite nominations for the Nobel Prize in Economics. Only one of them did not win the Nobel Prize in Economics. So let's start with him. He wrote this paper in the year of my birth, 1953, a guy called Gorman. I think it's William Gorman. In a paper called Community Preference Fields. And what he was considering is that neoclassical theory gives you this nice, simple way, or mathematically simple way, of representing people's tastes in the same way that the weather forecasters represent pressure on a map. So they use isobars to show join points of equal pressure. Economists use what they call indifference curves to join combinations of goods that gives a consumer equal satisfaction, and they then derive their individual demand curve from that front. Now, what they jump over in all the textbooks is, okay, that derives it for a single individual. And that gives you a downward sloping market demand curve, which is an essential part of neoclassical economic theory, that, demand falls as price rises. And that idea so they can prove it, assuming people behave the way that they do with these indifference curves. They can prove that individuals, what they call Hicksian compensated demand curve, necessarily slopes downwards. So demand falls as price rises, demand rises as price falls. And that's called the law of demand. Now, textbooks think it's just a simple way to go from an individual to a market demand curve. You simply add up everybody's individual demand curves. That doesn't apply in general, because one part of deriving that individual demand curve is the belief that you can change the relative prices without changing income. Now, if you take yourself in isolation and I consider changing the price of chocolate croissants and see how many chocolate croissants you buy versus other subjects, I can easily find it that I can imagine I can change the price of chocolate croissants without changing Phil Dobbie's income. That's a reasonable assumption. But if I then consider the entire economy and I want to work out the demand for chocolate croissants and automobiles and telephones and so on, then when I change relative prices, I change the distribution of income.
Yeah. Okay. Starting with the chocolate croissant manufacturers, who
can suddenly buy it. If the price falls, they can't buy as much.
Yeah.
So there are income effects of changing relative prices when you try to sum individual demand. You can't hold that income constant anymore. Now, the first person to work out what this meant was William Gorman. And he wrote a paper called Community Preference Fields in 1953, which was forgotten by the profession. It was rediscovered later and called the Sonnenschein-Mansholt-Brewer theorem after the second round of people that discovered this condition. But what he wanted to say was, can I derive a set of indifference curves for a whole society? And he said, yes, I can. I can derive, just like we've got a little map for individuals where we derive the individual demand curve, we can derive a community, what he calls a community indifference locus, which is a set of curves describing the utility of the entire economy. Simple. And here he said, there's just one condition. He said, we will show that there is just one community indifference locus through each point if and only if the angle curves for different individuals at the same prices are parallel straight lines. Gobbledygook statement. He then clarifies it a few sentences later. Quote unquote. This one should be obvious. The necessary and sufficient condition quoted above is intuitively reasonable. It says, in effect, that an extra unit of purchasing power should be spent in the same way, no matter to whom it is given.
Just how many chocolate croissants can a man take?
No, it's not that. It's Bill Gates is walking up to buy his chocolate croissants. He sees an unemployed, he sees a homeless person. Gives the homeless person $10. Homeless person goes and buys, buys some crack cocaine. Because how else can you cope with being homeless? On the other hand, if the homeless person sees Bill Gates and wants to say how famous he is, he make a sense. I gave money to Bill Gates. He's going to give Bill Gates $10. And Bill Gates will then go and spend that $10 on crack cocaine. Or the other possibility is that Bill Gates gives $10 to the homeless person, and the homeless person then goes and buys a tiny fragment of Da Vinci's Coda, because that's the main thing in terms of discretionary spending apparently that Bill Gates does. He's trying to collect all of Leonardo da Vinci's works.
So your point is money means different things to different people based on how much money they've already got.
Differently. It is not intuitively. Yeah. It is, pardon the French, I'm going to go total over. This is the total French word here. This is fucking bullshit of the first order. It is not intuitively reasonable. It is total crap. What they're saying is we're trying to avoid a consequence of our own theory we don't like, because what they wanted to think was they could go from individual demand curves to market demand curves very smoothly. They found, in fact, they can't. In fact, if they say people have different tastes and different commodities have different characteristics as well, then you can't derive a collective set of indifference curves for a whole society, which they regularly use in their work. That includes Nordhaus. Or they have to say that income distribution doesn't change. Changing income distribution doesn't change demand. Now, what that means is, first of all, Bill Gates has got the same taste as a homeless person. What it also means is that you can use part of Da Vinci's Coda the same way you can use crack cocaine, the same way you can use spam. They're all interchangeable, and people's purchases of those will remain at the same proportion.
So this is, this is the problem of,
total bullshit.
But this is the problem of so much economics, isn't it? That people are...
Economic theory lets people get away with. This stuff gets published in a journal rather than somebody saying, you've got to be kidding. There's no way that's reasonable. Go back and redo your mathematics. They publish the damn stuff, and then it gets simplified and put into the textbooks, and the kids think there's science.
Yeah, but so simplicity is the thing, isn't it? Because that is the thing. That economists are there striving to find a simplistic way of describing what is actually a complex scenario.
And that they should be realizing occasionally they reach log jams and they've got to change direction. But what they do instead is come up with a total bullshit assumption to get them over it. So that's William Gorman. He should have got the Nobel Prize for that. That's as absurd as 90% of the Nobel Prize winners.
Who else is a contender for your first?
Well, there's absolutely no contest for the first role. Friedman wins absolutely because he legitimized getting away with bullshit assumptions like that. And this is a paper called The Methodology of Positive Economics, which he wrote in 1966. He got the Nobel Prize in 1976. So he's one of these double winners. There'll be quite a few of them when we finally publish the Nobel Prize to Economics book. So in The Methodology of Positive Economics, he gave the license to economists to come up with absolute nonsense and justify it. So here it is. Truly important and significant hypotheses will be found to have, inverted commas, assumptions, close inverted commas, that are wildly inaccurate descriptions of reality. And here's the punchline. And in general, the more significant the theory, the more unrealistic the assumptions in this sense. The reason is simple. A hypothesis is important if it explains, inverted commas, much by little. That is, if it abstracts from the common and crucial elements from the mass of complex and detailed circumstances surrounding the phenomena. And to explain it permits valid prediction on the basis of them alone. To be important, therefore, a hypothesis must be descriptively false in its assumptions. Now, there's a grain of truth there, and this grain of truth is what they drag out to defend this crap every time they get attacked over it. And they say, look, if you had a map of the London Tube, this is a popular example they use, it wouldn't work. It was completely realistic. You've got to abstract from so much of reality to use the London Tube map. But the London Tube map connects the right suburbs on the right lines. It leaves out it makes simplifying assumptions. They are justifying what I'm calling barking mad assumptions, using exactly the same thing. And like a barking mad assumption would be to assume that you can hop into Piccadilly and come out at what's my favourite Cockfosters in one train journey. No, you can't. If you try to use a map that did that, you'd be going crazy. And that's what economics has done. It's produced a crazy map and justified on the basis that it's a simplifying map. So Friedman, by giving that license, and everybody who gets challenged about an absurd assumption defends themselves on the basis of Friedman's methodology statement. He is outright, without fail, the winner of the universal Nobel Prize in economics.
Right. So he goes into the Hall of Fame. You've got one.
Absolutely.
You've got one more then.
Oh, two more, but I'll probably choose. It's a difficult choice here. Sharp or Samuelson? I'll read Sharp because Samuelson's on the same point as Sharp. But actually, I'll give Samuelson an honourable mention here. He's definitely going to win a Nobel Prize. But here's him on the same point as Gorman in a paper called Social Indifference Curves, written in 1956. And he says, if within the family there can be assumed to take place an optimal reallocation of income so as to keep each member's dollar expenditure of equal ethical worth, then there can be derived for the whole family a set of well-behaved indifference contours relating the total of what it consumes. The family can be said to act as if it maximizes such a group preference function. Here's the punchline. And remember, this is American. Okay? The same argument will apply to all of society if optimal reallocations of income can be assumed to keep the ethical worth of each person's marginal dollar equal. By means of Hicks's composite commodity theorem and by other considerations, a rigorous proof is given that the newly defined social or community indifference contours have the regularity properties of ordinary individual preference contours. In other words, America operates like one big happy family, and people before income is spent reallocated around so everybody thinks that everybody else is getting what they should be getting, and on goes American society, and everybody's happy and lives happily ever after.
So I'm not quite getting that, but is it sort of saying that everyone understands where they are in society and they're getting...
No. It says Rupert Murdoch says, I've got too much, Phil Dobbie hasn't got enough.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Okay.
So Rupert Murdoch sends you a check and he sends a check to lots of other worthy individuals that don't get paid as much as him. And then after that's all done, we all spend and everybody's happy.
Right. Well, I mean,
that's America.
Well, Rupert Murdoch has sent you a check, and he sent me a check. We've both worked for him, but but I don't think I don't think we were getting paid what we were worth in either of those cases. Actually, to be honest with you, exactly. So there's that theory not working. This
presumes to defend capitalism. This presumes there's a benevolent dictator reallocates income so everybody's happy with the distribution of income. Nobody complains. That is barking mad. That is not a simple. That is a barking mad assumption. Actually, it deserves a special mention because both those ones predate Friedman's nonsense, and in fact, Friedman. So
but that's his answer to the wealth divide. Then is it the very wealthy will realise that they are in an advantageous position, and guilt will get the better of them. Is that the
effectively they generously reallocate income, and everybody's happy. Nobody complains anywhere at all about the distribution of income.
How's that happening, though? In what? I mean, they're not advocating sending checks, surely.
You've got to be. It happens on Pluto. Right. On Uranus. It probably happens on Uranus. I mean, it is a total fantasy vision of a world. It's nonsense. And that's what I call one of these barking mad assumptions that should have been called out and said, Paul, first of all, you're assuming every family is a happy family. So what's the classic? Is it Dostoevsky or all happy families are the same. Every unhappy family is different. I've forgotten the book that comes from, but there's no unhappy families. So everybody's happy and all families redistribute within themselves. And then let's extend that to the entire society. You're barking mad, Paul. This is nonsense. So that's another barking.
Right, but these people believe these theories, don't they? So this is a bit different from the Nobel. Your definition of Nobel.
See, let's put it another way.
Well, because I think the example, the Nobel Prize, and I know you wrote about this in your post where you're writing about this. You're referring to Alan Sokal, the physics professor who actually did submit a paper.
Hoaxes.
Knowing it was a hoax paper, and it got peer reviewed, and or maybe it didn't, but it was. But the publications just pushed went ahead and published it anyway, even though it was a hoax. And so his point was there's just not enough checking going on in these journals. And I think there were more social sciences, weren't they, rather than pure science, but of course economics is a social science, so very susceptible to this. So isn't that what you're looking at? People who are actually deliberately almost attempting hoaxes rather than just putting together theories that are plain wrong. Aren't you looking for people who are saying, well, actually, no, I'm just trying it on here. I'm just going to
I'm trying people who get to a particular point and pull a hoax on themselves as well as the rest of society, okay? Just because you think
so, they haven't questioned it
race doesn't mean you've got a right to poison the horse that would win if you didn't feed it, if you didn't nobble it with some drugs before the race. And that's what they've done.
Right. Okay, well, there we are. This time next year, then, can we hold you to that?
Yes, I've got working with the new Real World Economics Review. I suggested the idea to them, and of course they have put out previously. They put out the Dynamite Award for Economics, which went to Alan Greenspan. That was for the three people who. Three nominated, as one at the top. Greenspan was the top. The people who've done the most to blow up the global economy, because the Nobel. The actual Nobel made his money out of creating dynamite, of course. So the Dynamite Award went to him. They gave the Revere Award in Economics to me, to the people who most cogently warned of the crisis before it happened. So there's to be a third prize in the sequence, the Nobble Prize in Economics, for the people whose ideas have done most to nobble the development of economics over time with barking mad assumptions that were taken seriously and then perverted the course of economics over time. Milton Friedman, clearly the first winner. What I'm planning to do is, first of all, to produce a book on the Nobel Prize in Economics, going through all these papers in satirical detail, but also to have an annual award ceremony where we award, starting in 1969 to say 1970, the first time around, so get about 12, the first dozen winners of the Nobel Prize, and then each year have another one announced for more recent contributions, where people have either done, recent to important work on nobbling economics, like, for example, Ben Bernanke would be one of my nominees for the recent winners, or a recent paper, highly outstanding capacity to nobble the development of economics away from things it doesn't like. So that'd be every year. And I'm going to see if we can actually do it in Sweden on the same day as the Nobel Prize, at a suitably glitzy location.
Right. I'll get my dinner jacket ready.
Yep.
And look, any litigation that follows, nothing to do with me.
Indeed, that's right. It'll come down on my head. Absolutely.
I'm just the host. All right, Steve, we'll catch you again very soon. Thank you for that.
Welcome.
Next time, we'll look into the idea put out by the Shadow Chancellor at the Labour Party conference last week that perhaps we should be offering everybody share ownership. In fact, that every worker who's working for a company of a certain size should each year increase their ownership of that company. What would that do? Is that a good idea? I did actually talk to the Shadow Chancellor last week and said, well, shouldn't companies be doing that anyway if it's such a good thing? We'll get Steve Keen's views on that next time on the Debunking Economics podcast. I'm Phil Dobbie. Thanks for listening. We'll see you then.